We all think of the Great Depression as a time of pure economic collapse, right? But what if I told you that for one country, that very disaster accidentally triggered an industrial revolution? That's the story we're diving into today.
So here's the puzzle. How does a global catastrophe, something that shatters the world economy, accidentally create an industrial powerhouse? Argentina in the 1930s was this agricultural giant, its entire well-being tied to selling goods to the world. A few years later, its cities are humming with brand new factories. This wasn't some grand 5-year plan. No, this was an accident, born from absolute desperation. Let's unpack how it happened.
All right, to really get the sheer scale of this change, we have to rewind. We need to see what Argentina looked like before the crash. You could almost call it a golden age, an age built on one single, incredibly powerful economic engine.
I mean, it's hard to overstate this. In the 1920s, Argentina was one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. Its entire economy was perfectly tuned for one thing, exporting massive amounts of beef and wheat, mostly to Europe and the US. This model made the country unbelievably rich, but it also made it unbelievably fragile. Its entire lifeline was plugged directly into the global economy.
And then, someone pulled the plug. When the world economy crashed, the global appetite for Argentina's products just vanished. The value of their exports fell off a cliff, dropping by a jaw-dropping 64% in just 4 years. Just try to imagine that. 2/3 of your entire country's income, gone in the blink of an eye.
So this wasn't just a bad recession. It was a full-blown identity crisis. The very thing that had made Argentina a titan of the global economy was now its Achilles heel. The country was basically bleeding money, and it couldn't afford to just sit around and hope its old customers came back. It had to do something, anything, to stop.
Which brings us to what the government did next. And you got to remember, what they came up with were not some brilliant visionary policies for building a new future. No, these were frantic, short-term fixes just to keep the country's finances from completely imploding.
The main tool they used was something called exchange controls. Now, it sounds kind of technical, but the core idea is actually pretty simple. Argentina was running out of foreign money, dollars and pounds, because no one was buying their stuff anymore. So exchange controls were a desperate move to seize the steering wheel and dictate exactly how every last one of those precious dollars got spent.
So here's how it worked, basically. First, the government took control of all the foreign cash coming in from what little exports were left. Then, it set up 2 different price lists for that cash. If you wanted to import something truly essential, like fuel for the country, you could buy dollars at a cheap, official rate. But for everything else, clothes, radios, all the stuff people buy, you had to go to the free market and pay a way higher price. That is, if you could even get your hands on foreign currency at all.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the thinking at the time. The whole point was not to build up local industry. It was just about balancing the national budget and stopping the peso from becoming worthless. Building factories wasn't even a secondary goal. It wasn't on the list at all. It was a total accident.
But here's the twist. These desperate financial moves had this enormous, completely unintentional side effect. By making it super expensive and difficult to buy stuff from other countries, the government had, without even realizing it, created the perfect conditions for a domestic industrial boom.
I mean, think about it from a common sense perspective. Argentinians still needed clothes, they still needed food and household items. But the stores that used to be full of goods from America and Europe were suddenly looking pretty bare. The supply chain was broken. So what's the solution?
Exactly. You make it yourself. A whole wave of entrepreneurs, some local, some foreign, saw this incredible opening. With all the foreign competition basically blocked at the border by these new currency rules, there was a huge captive market just sitting there waiting for someone to make stuff for them. And the growth was explosive. Just look at the textile industry. In 1935, textiles made up less than 16% of all industrial production. By 1946, it was over 21%. That's a massive jump. And you saw that same story happening across all sorts of consumer goods. The crisis built this protective wall, and a whole new industrial world started growing like crazy behind it. Now, there's a fancy economist term for this: import substitution industrialization, or ISI for short. It just means you start making things at home instead of importing them. But the thing that's so wild about Argentina's story is that they became a poster child for ISI without even trying. It wasn't a strategy from a textbook, it was a pure reaction to a crisis. They basically fell backwards into a whole new economic model. So what did this new accidental industry actually look like on the ground? Well, it wasn't some monolithic thing. It was a really dynamic, kind of messy mix of the old and the new. The boom was all about light industry, stuff people use every day, like food, drinks, and especially textiles. And you got this interesting dual structure popping up. You had a few huge modern factories, but also thousands of tiny family-run workshops. All this action was clustered in the big coastal cities, which pulled in workers from the countryside in huge numbers. Get this, the number of industrial workers nearly doubled in about a decade. That's a gigantic social and economic earthquake.
And it wasn't just local folks getting in on the action. Big global companies read the tea leaves. They realized if they couldn't ship their products to Argentina anymore, well, they'd just build factories in Argentina. Huge names that you'd recognize today, Goodyear, Johnson & Johnson, RCA, they all rushed in during the early 30s to set up shop behind that protective wall and sell directly to this newly isolated market.
But this chaotic, unplanned transformation didn't just build factories. It also created a deep, painful conflict that was really about the soul of the nation. It forced the question, what kind of country was Argentina supposed to be?
All of a sudden, you had these two warring visions for the country's future. On one side, you had the new factory owners and the nationalists. They were saying, this is it. This is the future. A modern country needs its own industry to be truly strong and independent. But on the other side, you had the old guard, the traditional farming elites. They argued that Argentina was losing its way, abandoning its natural strengths. They saw these new factories as inefficient, artificial things that were distorting the economy that had made them powerful. And this wasn't just some boring economic debate about tariffs. This was a fiery, passionate argument about national identity. It was a fight that would define Argentine politics for decades to come. A battle between embracing the country's traditional role in the world or forcing a radical industrial transformation.
So in the end, a global crisis shoved Argentina down a path it never intended to take. It swapped its identity as the world's breadbasket for a much more uncertain future as an industrial nation, and it left the country with a question that so many nations are still wrestling with today. Is it better to focus on building what you need for yourself or on perfecting what you sell best to the world? It's a question Argentina and the rest of us are still trying to figure out. Thanks for joining us.